Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the session of the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. My name is Carleen Chamos. I'm the Collective Impact and Equity Director at the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I have Emily Luke, our Research and Policy intern, who is joining us for this session as well. This year, the CAHC is focused on thriving communities, and each session spotlights a unique approach to strengthening housing stability for households and communities across Connecticut. You can join the conversation at hashtag CAHC 2023 across social. So the session is titled Using Ancient Philosophy to Manage Your Stress, the Stoic Affordable Housing Professional. Before we turn it over to our presenters, we would like to thank our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, our visionary sponsors, the Connecticut Department of Housing and Wells Fargo, our champion sponsors, Bank of America, JD Amelia and Associates, MMT Bank, Webster Bank, and the Melville Charitable Trust. And our foundation sponsors, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Kornwegznick, and Trinity Financials. These sponsors' deep support has allowed the conference to happen again this year. Last but not least, a big thank you to our featured investors, Heritage Housing Inc., for your support for the CAHC. A few housekeeping items before we get started. The session is being recorded and we will make all recordings available as soon as possible. Please remain on mute unless the speaker asks you to unmute. If you have any technology issues, please select the icon in the Zoom control panel and send it in the chat to myself or to Emily, and we will do our best to support you. And your speaker, David, will let you know when he would like content questions to be submitted. And post the session, you can complete a session feedback survey by clicking on the microphone icon in the lobby. We really appreciate your feedback. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David to get us started.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to try to move kind of quickly, but it's a lot of material to cover in less than 30 minutes. So I made the slides kind of verbose so that you could look at them later if you want to remember what it is I was talking about. We're going to talk about an approach here to managing your stress in the affordable housing business. It can be a quite stressful career choice with crushing deadlines and people who need a lot of help. And many people turn to many different types of approaches, and they're all, I think, valid. You know, I've looked at meditation, I've looked at Taoist philosophy before, but what really has worked for me is Stoic philosophy, which is not as well known. So I wanted to take this time to kind of share it with you. Give me a very broad brush overview. There's a lot more material that I really just don't have time to cover, but I want to make it practical and help you see how this philosophy might be able to help you. Carleen, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to conduct a short poll. It's going to be anonymous to just understand, you know, how much stress people in this session deal with in their career. If you don't mind taking a minute to just answer the questions, I will run through in a minute what the results were. Well, it's already coming in that most people are in the moderate stress category, but there's a pretty large number in the high stress. Whoever is in the no stress at all category, God bless you. You're very lucky. Most of us do not fall into that category. So you can see that stress is definitely an issue in affordable housing, and I'm hoping that this session might help with that. So without any further ado, why don't we go through this? So Stoic is a very misunderstood term. You know, a lot of us think that that Stoic philosophy means unfeeling or robotic. It doesn't mean that at all. That's just the way the word has come to mean in our language, but the Stoic philosophy itself didn't develop that way at all. It's a type of philosophy that was very practical. It's not the type of philosophy you might think about as being kind of ivory tower and theoretical. It was very practical. It was very much about how you can solve problems in your own life. It developed in ancient Greece out of the thinking of Socrates, but really blossomed in ancient Rome from about 200 BCE until about 200 CE. Stoic philosophy really stresses the key idea of it is that you can reach eudaimonia, which is translated roughly as contentment, by living a virtuous life that is free of attachment to externals. And the Stoics really believed that virtue was the only good thing in the world, that anything that happened to you was really indifferent. You should be indifferent to anything that was external to you. Even winning the lottery was something you should be indifferent to, but that what you should desire in life is virtue and the choice to make virtuous decisions. The three key authors of Stoicism whose works still survive. Many authors existed, but very few of their works survive. But these three we do have a lot from are Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. And I will focus on some quotes from each of them. It's worth just saying a minute about their lives because they were quite different from each other. Epictetus was actually born a slave. He was eventually freed, but not before his leg was crippled through some kind of a beating he had endured. He then took on the life of a philosopher, which ended up exiling him from Rome. And so he led a very difficult life and a life without much comfort. Seneca, on the other hand, was born in wealth. He ended up becoming the tutor to the Emperor Nero, who became emperor as basically a teenager. But Nero soured on him and eventually had him executed. So Seneca, while maybe had a more comfortable life, still ended up enduring much hardship. And then lastly, Marcus Aurelius was actually an emperor of Rome. The work that we have of his is his private journal, where he wrote down thoughts from each day, and that's the resource we go to about his thinking. And so, as I mentioned before, the Stoics believe that only the virtues are the only good things in the world, and they categorized 4 different virtues: justice, which they meant to mean equality, to mean treating other people with kindness, doing good things for the world; temperance, which meant freedom from what the Stoics called the passions, which was anger, resentment, greed, feelings like that. Temperance was really about controlling those emotions. Courage, which meant both physical courage, but also mental courage, the ability to stand up to the tyrant, the ability to advocate for yourself. And lastly, wisdom, which was just purely the gaining of knowledge. And so you'll see in the slides to come that I'll connect some of the quotes to these virtues. The Stoics then organized how to become a Stoic by following 3 disciplines. The first discipline to master was the discipline of desire and aversion, which was really about how we don't fail to get what we desire and how we do not fall for what we want to avoid. Once mastered, the Stoic would then move on to action and non-action, which is so that we always engage in appropriate behavior towards others. And then lastly, once those prior 2 are mastered, the Stoic would master the discipline of conferring or withdrawing assent, so that we avoid error and hasty judgments. And what I'm going to do is walk you through each of these disciplines with some quotes from the original texts, and then talk about some scenarios that I've faced in my practice as an affordable housing professional and how a Stoic thinking can get you to a good outcome in these circumstances. So the first is the discipline of desire. And this, as I mentioned before, is really about getting the things that, being able to attain what you desire. It was associated most closely with the virtues of temperance and courage. And we're going to start with a quote. This is literally the first line of Epictetus's work, the Handbook. Some things are up to us and some are not. Up to us are judgment, inclination, desire, aversion. In short, whatever is our own doing. Not up to us are our bodies, possessions, reputations, public offices. In short, whatever isn't our own doing. Epictetus also provides us a quote that explains this theory a little bit more with a practical example. This comes from his Discourses. Suppose we were on a voyage. What is it within my power to do? To choose the captain and the crew and the day and the time of departure. Then a storm falls on us. Why should that be any concern of mine? I've done all I can. Coping with the storm is someone else's business, the captain's. But now the ship is starting to sink. What can I do? All I can do is do what I can. And the idea that Epictetus is getting at with these is that, first of all, you probably notice he's drawing a line about what we control and what we don't control. That is much starker than what our society draws. Epictetus believes we literally do not control our bodies. We don't control things that society says we own, like our clothes or our house. And that's because if we become attached to those things, then the discipline of desire says that we're going to be upset if those things are taken away from us. Whereas if we only attach to virtue, if we attach to virtuous thoughts and actions, nothing can take those away from us. That is the key idea of the discipline of desire. So let's look at a scenario. This is probably one that many affordable housing professionals have experienced in the last 2 years. The electrical equipment for a construction project you are developing is delayed due to supply chain disruptions. The equipment may not arrive for another 6 months, and you have a vacant building and a rapidly dwindling construction interest reserve. Worst case, your budget could run $1 million over, and you could lose all your developer fee. Conventionally, this appears to be a pretty bad situation. But if you approach it from the way Epictetus did, what you see is that almost everything in this scenario here is indifferent. It can be preferred or dispreferred, but it should not be desired. You should be indifferent to it. The vacant building, the money, the delays, they're all things that are indifferent. They do not affect your ability to make a virtuous decision or intention. But what you can do in this scenario and what you should desire is what is the virtuous choice. What is just, temperate, courageous, or wise to do in this circumstance? And I would argue that the virtuous choice is to continue to try to get the building open as much as you can. Get it open so that people who need the housing can move into it. But desiring that you make money on it is really not in keeping with the Stoic philosophy. So the next discipline, the discipline of action, is how we avoid nihilism, which is basically the thought that I don't control anything, nothing matters, and so why should I even bother trying? That nihilism is something you can easily fall into by just focusing on the discipline of desire. So the discipline of action is really about what choices you take in the world and how you decide upon those decisions. And it is really associated with justice, about doing good. We're going to start with a quote actually from Cicero, who was not a Stoic philosopher, but he did write about the Stoics. Take the case of one whose task it is to shoot a spear or arrow straight at some target. One's ultimate aim is to do all in one's power to shoot straight, and the same applies with our ultimate goal. In this kind of example, it is to shoot straight that one must do all one can. Nonetheless, it is to do all one can to accomplish the task that is really the ultimate aim. It is just the same with what we call the supreme good in life. To actually hit the target is, as we say, to be selected, but not sought. The next quote comes from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Action by action, you must build up your life and be content if each action attains its end. Nobody can prevent you doing this, but surely something external will impede this. No one can stop you from undertaking action with wisdom, justice, self-discipline, and practical wisdom. But what if some other aspect of the activity is prevented? Well, yes, but if you adopt an attitude of serene acceptance with regard to such an obstacle, and if you know how to return prudently to that which you are able to do, then another action will replace it, and it will fit in with the harmonious life we are talking about. Both quotes are getting at the idea that what you can do in the discipline of action is choose to make a just act. Whether that act reaches the target is out of your control. As Cicero says, it's selected but not sought. If you are an archer, in Cicero's analogy, you can focus on practice, you can focus on your breathing, you can focus on pulling the bow back, but once the arrow leaves the bow, it is outside of your control. And you should never, in Stoicism, seek to have the target hit. You should really seek the preparation. So to look at an example here, this is another one that probably many of us have experienced in affordable housing. You receive an urgent call from a desperate person seeking immediate shelter in one of your properties. The person may very well end up sleeping on the street that night if you don't do anything. Unfortunately, the affordable housing property you manage is 100% occupied with a lengthy wait list. You grasp for words as you feel the caller's disappointment and dejection grow. The impediment to action advances action. This is actually a quote from Marcus Aurelius. And obviously, in this circumstance, you can't actually just move the person into your property, but you can choose a just or wise action that replaces that one. You can choose to connect the person with other housing providers. You could call other housing providers. There's nothing that impedes you being able to do that. And so finally, we're going to move on to the discipline of assent, which is really about when you receive some sort of impression, such as someone calling you in desperation. It's about suspending your judgment of what to do about that impression until you have time to ask yourself, is this up to me, and what action can I take? In the first quote here, Epictetus is almost imagining a discussion with a tyrant whose impressions would make many of us fearful and anxious, but for him, he responds level-headedly. Divulge your secrets. I refuse, because that's something that's up to me. I'll clap you in irons. What are you talking about, man? Me? You'll shackle my leg, but not even Zeus can conquer my will. I'll throw you in prison, my body. I'll cut off your head. Well, have you ever heard me suggest that I'm unique in having a non-detachable head? The second quote here is from Seneca, who notes that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This is such a key concept of Stoicism, which is that when an impression hits you, it's your judgment of that impression that often causes you anxiety or stress. It is not actually the event itself. And then the last quote here is from Epictetus' Discourse, and it's really about stage fright. And Epictetus really gets to the bottom of what causes stage fright. Whenever I see someone in a state of anxiety, I ask myself, what is it that he wants? Unless he wanted something that wasn't up to him, why would he be anxious? The reason why a minstrel feels no anxiety when he's singing by himself at home, but does when he enters the theater, even if he's an excellent singer and a talented player of the lyre, is that he doesn't just want to sing well, but also to go down well with the audience, and that isn't up to him. The minstrel player in this scenario is falling victim to the impression that he should desire that the audience likes what he plays. But that's not really something he controls. All he can desire is to play the best he can. But we'll do one more scenario and then I'll wrap up. You've worked on financing to rehab a dilapidated affordable housing complex for 2 years and faced every challenge imaginable. 1 week before the scheduled closing, heavy rains caused severe flooding. Your apartments are barely spared from the flood, but your contractor abruptly decides to back out of the project and you're back to square one. This seems like a very stressful situation, but what Seneca and other Stoics would argue is suspend your judgment. The impression that the contractor backing out is bad for you is wrong. What is up to you? Not the contractor. But what is up to you is the action you can take and your virtue. The catastrophic flooding, the contractor, not up to me, but renovating the complex is virtuous, and so we should not give up on it. And so I'm going to wrap up by just giving you some little tips to how you may incorporate this practice into your daily life if you're interested in it. I have 2 quotes, and then I'll give you some resources that you can read for more information. Epictetus argues, let not slumber approach your weary eyes before reviewing all that you did during the day. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? What duty did I leave undone? And this is really about journaling. This is about self-examination. As Socrates said, the examined life isn't worth living. Or the unexamined life, sorry, isn't worth living. It's about trying to understand how your actions and how your thought processes were responded to. Marcus takes the opposite approach. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for, to huddle under the blankets and stay warm? And so these tips are really, first is to read, get it familiar with the text. I think modern overviews are helpful at first because the original texts are a little hard to understand without that. Review what you did during the day. How did you respond to impressions? And then ask yourself during the day, is this up to me? What is the virtuous response? And do I assent to this impression? And I'll finish up by just giving you the names of a few resources you can look to if you're interested to learn more. The 2 modern texts are very good overviews that give a very detailed understanding of the philosophy. And then the original texts, these are the 3 key ones that I talked about in this session. There are others. You can get them all for free at this point, but if you want, you can also buy the books. And so it looks like I've got about 4 minutes left here. So I would love to open it up for any questions that anybody has before we finish up here. And thank you all for joining. I hope it was helpful. So if you want to ask a question, you can just raise your hand. I will stop sharing. Let's see. Where would you get them for free was one question. I think that if you just Google these texts, you will find them for free. There's a number of free libraries out there that have them, mostly associated with universities. But that's basically how I found them. And my decision was to read them for free first, and then I ended up buying them as books so I can mark them up and stuff. But kind of like a free trial. All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. I guess we can finish up a couple minutes early, and thank you all for joining.